Hi, this is Pastor Bob, and welcome to Pastor Bob Daily. This is the very first time that I've included somebody else in Pastor Bob Daily. You might know this guy. He's doing a new podcast called The Deacon. You are the Deacon, my good friend Andreas Larson.
Yes.
Andreas used to travel with me, and we've been many countries together, many festivals, a lot of things going on. And I promised everybody that I would talk about the raven sightings today. And I thought it'd be great to include Andreas because Andreas has been with me actually for a lot of those sightings. But let me start at the very beginning. There was a time in my office, probably maybe 10 years ago, 11 years ago, maybe even more than that, 12 years, when I was sitting and talking to someone, and God was trying to get my attention to tell them something, and I was not paying attention because it was something very hard to say, and I didn't want to say it. And all of a sudden, outside of my window, a raven started squawking and just kept looking at me and kept squawking and wouldn't budge. And finally, my housekeeper came in, and she said, I think that raven is trying to tell you something. And I thought, I think it is too. But she went outside and tried to get the raven's attention, tried to take food out, and the raven kept looking just at me and stayed right there and kept squawking. And so I turned to the person I was talking to and I told them what I felt like God wanted me to say, and the raven took off. Well, that was the first time that I'd ever had an experience like that with a raven. A little later on, a good friend called me and said, I had the weirdest dream last night. I dreamt that there was this great big black bird sitting on the top of your house, and he brought peace and confirmation from God. And I thought, okay, that's strange. And then it just kept happening. I kept having raven sightings. They kept landing there. Everywhere I went, it seemed like there were ravens. And I went to Sweden not too long after that. I was sitting in my room, and I heard somebody knock at the door, and I went to answer the door, and there was no one else home. And so I went back and sat down. I thought that was strange. And then I heard the knocking again, and I realized it was at the window. And I went over and opened the drapes of the window, and it was a raven sitting there trying to get my attention. Well, that kept happening. Andreas, we went to England.
Yeah.
And one of the festivals we were doing there, we had a raven appearance there, didn't we?
Yeah,
Remember that?
that's pretty wild.
Yeah, talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, it was interesting. We went there for a few years in a row.
Yeah.
And there was one time where we got there in the morning before it started at the weekend festival, and there was a lot of noise from the trees around. Two different kind of blackbirds just squawking at each other and fighting, and the maintenance guy was there at that time.
Yeah.
So we asked the maintenance guy what's up with those birds, and he said, you know what? He's been a maintenance guy there for many years, and he said he's never experienced anything like it. Like the day before, a whole group of ravens and a whole group of crows appeared, and they'd been squawking and fighting ever since the day before the festival, right there around the castle where we headed. And he's never experienced that before. Interesting.
And that wasn't the first time. The last time that we had ravens that just kind of began to surround us in places that we, that we were. I remember staying at your house in Denmark, and I was there for maybe a month at one point. Do you remember that? And it seemed like the ravens kind of appeared the day I got there.
Yeah.
And didn't they live in one of the trees or something around there? What was the story?
Yeah, it was actually at my parents' house.
Yes, right.
Where there's some, the woods are pretty close by, and there's always a lot of big black birds down there in the woods. But they never group up at where my parents live. So it's about maybe 1 kilometer or half a mile away. And then when you came, suddenly a whole group of these big black birds, kind of a mix between ravens and crows, called Rauff in Danish, moved up and lived in the great big tree right at the house.
Yeah.
And they stayed there for the whole time.
And they would circle above and stuff too.
Yeah. And then when you left, they went back to the woods.
Well, you know, it started to be a little confusing because when you think of ravens, you think of something maybe satanic or something evil. You know, when we talk about ravens, or crows, we talk about, if it's in a group, we call it a murder of crows. Or an unkindness of ravens, or you know, we use those words to describe them, and people think, you know, because of Edgar Allan Poe, you know, the quote "the raven nevermore," and you know others that have written about it. It's become a very dark symbol. The Bible doesn't speak that way about them, does it?
No, not even once.
No. In fact, there's some very positive references to ravens and how God's used them in the Bible. But that's not all. You know, I was doing a podcast years ago called Getting Naked with Pastor Bob. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Pretty scary podcast.
Don't
and
watch
I was
it.
just
don't listen to it.
But it was just I called it Getting Naked with Pastor Bob because I wanted to really be very transparent and talk about a lot of things with it. And there was a few times when I would sit in the yard there in Denmark, and more than once a raven came to sit right beside me as I'm doing the podcast, and then left when I was finished. So they kept appearing in Denmark quite a bit.
Yeah.
I remember one time, Andreas, we were parking. Tell that story. Do you remember?
Oh yeah, I'd never experienced anything so in that way.
Yeah.
Well, we went to get some Chinese food.
Because that's important.
Yeah.
Right.
In Aarhus, Denmark. It's about an hour drive from where my parents live.
In Fjellerup.
Fjellerup, yeah. Or Fjellerup.
Fjellerup, yeah.
It is now. And then we went, I drove over to the Chinese restaurant in the center of the city, and there were no parking lots. The ones who are familiar with Aarhus, it's Europapladsen. And there was very few parking lots.
Parking spaces.
Yeah, parking spaces. Yeah. And then I went down to the harbor. I drove around to find a parking space, and there were some spaces down there, but you had to walk for maybe a few minutes definitely to get there. So then PastorBobBeeman, then he then he said, you know what? I think God has a parking space for us right in front of the Chinese. I think He's gonna bless us with that. And I couldn't stop laughing, and then just shaking my head and all right, okay. Well, I had to see if I couldn't just not try. So we went back there, and yeah. Sure enough, there's a parking space right out in front of the Chinese, and yeah, that wasn't enough. There's the sign with the big P on it, right next to the parking space, with a big raven sitting right on top,
waiting for us to park.
Yeah.
And after we parked, then he flew away. Yeah. Gosh, Andreas, there's so many stories we could tell, but another one that comes to mind was in California. There was one year that Cornerstone Festival did a Cornerstone in California. And I remember we had borrowed a car, I was driving, and we were lost. We couldn't find our way. Do you remember that?
Yeah, it was out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Like the Cornerstone used to be in Illinois.
Right.
Out in the middle of nowhere. No signs.
And then, how did that happen? Do you remember exactly how it happened?
Well, we were kind of lost. We weren't sure, okay, is this the right way to go? We were off the interstate.
Yeah.
And we didn't really know which way to turn, and the roads got smaller.
Yeah.
And then
all of a sudden, was it two ravens that appeared?
Two ravens.
two ravens appeared, and we just felt like we were supposed to follow them, and we did. And they led us through, winding roads and turning different places, and right into Cornerstone.
Yeah.
They led us right there.
Right in front of the car, on the road.
Yeah.
And then when we could see the tents, and those appeared, and we drove in, then they left.
Yeah,
so
it was incredible.
That's nice of them.
Well, we could sit here all day and talk about raven stories because it keeps happening, and it seems like everybody who gets involved with Sanctuary all of a sudden starts seeing a lot of ravens because they follow us all over the world. They follow us.
Yeah.
One of the real joys of living here, and this is my home here in Tennessee. Behind me are my ducks and geese, but what you don't see probably right now are my ravens. There's 3 of them that live here. Most mornings when I open up the curtains to look outside, the 3 ravens are sitting right here waiting for me, and they're usually in the trees all day. They come, and you've seen them, they come and eat with the ducks and the geese, which doesn't happen in nature. And the coolest thing is that one of the ravens and one of the ducks have become best friends. And they follow each other around, and they eat together, and when there's puddles in the yard, they'll take a little bath together. And it happened one day, and I thought, what a fluke, what a strange thing. But it's happened many times since then, that we have these ravens that have just kind of become friends. But the coolest thing is that when I'm sitting at my computer and I'm working on things, or when I'm in prayer and God needs to get my attention, every single time, all 3 ravens will come and they'll just appear right at the window and keep reminding me. And that happens, again, all over the world. Andreas, you've had a lot of raven sightings since then on your own.
Yeah.
I've had a lot, and most people that work with Sanctuary have too. How has it been significant for you?
Yeah, for me, it hasn't been until after I really got involved with Sanctuary International and you, and that I noticed these ravens appearing at significant times.
Yeah.
And there's been, like, there's one time I was going to a festival in Switzerland, and I was really busy, and I just needed a weekend off, and I spent all my money on the plane ticket, and I thought, I was sitting in the airplane, and I was kind of discouraged, and thought, oh man,
I was thinking, man, I wish Pastor Bob would quit making me come to these things.
Yeah, I was. Spent all my money.
Yeah, I know.
And I was just, and I just felt that maybe this isn't even the right thing to do. Maybe I should just have stayed home. Then when the plane landed in Zurich, right there on the landing field, when it landed, there was a raven sitting on a pole, and he just kept sitting there. We were driving by the plane, and in that instant, I went from a feeling of being discouraged and confused to just get a real deep joy in my heart, and I couldn't stop smiling and just say a prayer of thanksgiving to God. And often, for me personally, it's the ravens has appeared all times throughout the year, at the weirdest times and the weirdest places all over the world, at times where I've been kind of on the right track, when I've had my mind focused on God and that constant communication. And,
yes.
So for me personally, it's been like God giving me a little thumbs up, like keep it up, and it has always reminded me of praying when I see a raven, and thanking God, and got the tattoo here.
And so, just about everybody in Sanctuary has a raven
Bible
tattoo at this point, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
but that's been the coolest part. And you know what you just said, Andreas, about just feeling God's presence and His guidance during those times. It's like instantaneous. You know that God is like sending that raven for a reason. And I'm not one of those kind of guys, and you're not either, who just kind of looks for signs and wonders and all those things. And in fact, I don't want anybody that's watching this to go looking for ravens and saying, see, God's talking to me too, and all of that, because it really isn't like that. But there have been significant times where God has sent some ravens. Yeah,
and I like to piggyback right a little bit on that, if
Please.
I may.
Yeah.
That, because of course, when I see a raven, I can't stop just smiling and thanking God, because it's so awesome that he's speaking to us through any kind of media. And God created everything. He created us, and He created our imagination, our interests, and everything. So, like you said, I also want to just stress the factor that don't look for signs and wonders to the extreme, where you let that take over. Like every time, I could use it every time I see a raven. Okay, God is giving me a thumbs up. This is okay for me to do. I didn't think it was okay. Maybe it was a little sinful, but there's a raven, so I'm good.
I can look at porn because there's a raven right outside my window right now, or whatever. Yeah.
But use it as line it up with Scripture. Like if it's something that if you don't really know, if it's something God really want to bless you with, or He's giving you a thumbs up, then
Yes.
Always go back to Scripture.
Absolutely, always. Well, we could sit here a lot longer and tell a whole lot more stories because there are so many. And this is the longest Pastor Bob Daily I have ever done. You understand why it's long. We wanted to tell significant stories, and I really wanted you to hear them. And I've been promising to tell Raven stories for a couple of years now, so we finally did. But I hope they're encouraging to you, because they sure have been to both of us, and they continue to be. Anyway, those are the Raven stories. God working in ways that you least expect sometimes. That's the cool thing about God working in our lives. He's not always predictable. And we like it like that. God bless you. Have a great day.